With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoweh's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. Hanging out at the tower with my friend SJ Jennings. Yo, SJ.
Yo.
Yeah, we're in the tower to do a couple-part series on what love is. We've talked about this before.
We did a whole series on the ingredients of love. You should look back in our archives and find that one. It's a 5 or 6 part series, I think.
Yeah, and the reason I feel God kind of nudging us back into this, SJ, is because, honestly, it's the primary thing. It's the real deal. It's the point of the spear. It's the deep end of the pool. It is this thing that God is about. And like you said, even though we've talked about it before, I think we have some stories and some updates and some discoveries and things like that we can talk about. Invite our listeners not only to maybe explore more with us here on this 2-part series on what love is, but go back to that one for even more. So with that, hey, recognize this. Ready?
Yeah, I do. I do. I remember that song well, yeah, from like in 1984 or whatever.
I think it is.
Yeah.
That's right. Robert Palmer.
Yeah, Addicted to Love.
Addicted to Love. You won't find it in too many church worship lineups.
Yeah, no, not typically. No, and if you're from that area, you might remember the music video that might distract us from what we're here to talk about.
The ladies who look like mannequins kind of doing their doing the band.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me get some controls on this. There we go.
That's right, rein it in.
Yeah, it's a song that haunts me a bit in that I'm made for love. Trinity created us in love, for love. The scriptures are just so full of this word. I mean, it's in your concordance, Old Testament, New Testament, 5, almost 600 times, versions of love, just looking up the word love. And there's a reason. There's a reason that it's this core ingredient in the human experience. And as Robert Palmer sings, we're addicted to it. And so I just wanted to circle back and have a conversation with you, explore a little more about what we're learning about this thing called love. And another song right there, right out of the 80s.
That's right. Power of Love.
Power of, oh yeah.
Some crazy little thing called love. Yeah. I mean, golly. Hey, send us an email with some of your favorite songs with love in the title, listeners.
Yeah.
Exploring more
I remember
at Zoweh.org.
I got to go back to the 70s, Muskrat Love, Captain.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just coming to me now. You opened the vault, bro.
Right.
You opened the vault.
Yeah.
So this might be a little review for listeners, especially alumni. I mean, we talk about this at our conferences. We talk about this in exploring more of the larger story. So it is a contextual piece that we as image bearers have got to get, not only understand the physics, the geography, kind of the academic stuff that goes along with this, what it is. And we'll talk about that, what it is, what it isn't, how it is, how to do it differently or better. But let's just kind of go back, SJ, to some things that maybe we've shared before in a little bit of review. Like I said, as image bearers, we're created for love. The Father, Son, and Spirit, let us make man in our image. Genesis 1, 2, and 3, before things go badly. We were created to be in love with God, to receive God's love. And with Adam and Eve, Eve is created to be a companion in this love journey with Adam. And like our tagline in the Rendezvous Project, 2 people walking with God together.
Mm-hmm.
If I could add anything to that, I'd put 2 more words: in love. 2 people walking with God together in love with God and in love with each other. SJ, if we know what we were created for, and we understand that through the fall, the enemy weasels his way into the garden, and it's love that is the greatest casualty. We go from unconditional love to this thing that is the results or the residue from the fall that's conditional love.
Yeah. So I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, this is going to be very different than what we talked about before. We were talking about the ingredients of love in that previous podcast, and that was well over a year ago that we did that series, and we've been on this journey still for that year and a half or however long it's been, and so we're in a different place. The other thing I want to say is I'm studying now in some of my own journey and my own story and recognizing that I've been living under what's called an orphan spirit most of my life. So a spirit of abandonment, aloneness, and a lack of love, right? I mean, because what happened to Adam, and Eve in the fall is essentially they became orphans. They became separated from God, right? And so even with the new Adam coming to bear the burden of our sins, we still live in this fallen place. So we have the presence of the Holy Spirit now, but we still live in this fallen place. And so essentially, all of us are living with an orphan spirit. Yeah. Right? And none of us are...
Or some manifestation of lack.
Right. Let me say it a different way. None of us is living in perfect sonship with God.
Daughtership, sonship, right.
Right. We look to Jesus as the one who did, even though he was here, right, in this fallen world. And so none of us is living in that way, but we're learning how to be loved more and more.
Yeah. And so we're going to just keep coming back from time to time at where we started with, so you're addicted to love. And unapologetically, Robert Palmer and Mannequin Band, we agree. And so when we see that the consequences of the fall, which you described well, now we live with that desire for happily ever after, with the need to get back to Eden, with the hope of having the tree of life again, and in the not yet. And so it's not perfect, but his love is perfect. What's in the way? What could be in the way of receiving? And we're just learning again, man, it's a lot deeper water. It's a lot worse than we thought. This performance life that we've all experienced and how it shapes, conditional love. I want to ask you in a second, how it shapes, how it alters, how it tarnishes, hijacks is a really good word, this desire for love. In the previous podcast, and I'll bring it back up now, we talk about the ingredients of love being validation, acceptance, worth, belonging, significance. We need a good working definition for love. It is so important, and yet we think we all know we're talking about the same thing. And what I want us to at least focus on for at least the first half of this particular podcast is these ingredients of love. What does love look like? What does love sound like? It looks and sounds like validation, acceptance, worth, belonging, significance, being included.
Invitation,
being invited.
Right.
So when I look at that in my story, particularly in the jungle of junior high and high school, with a bunch of other wild animals addicted to love, trying to fit in, right? Wanting to be a part, needing to be included, and feeling to some degree lost, insecure, unworthy,
unloved or unlovable.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And all the while, SJ, we're different in this parts of our story. My first 35 years, I went to church all the time.
Yeah.
Your first 35,
I went if somebody died or got married.
Hardly at all.
Right.
So the wild thing is we can come from two north and south, and yet it doesn't make a difference in how needy my heart was. Whether, listeners, you found music, whether you found academics and grades, I'm talking about junior high and high school, whether you found sports, whether you found humor, you're the funny. I mean, I look at some of the things that I used to try to get acceptance, worth, value, noticed.
Yeah, and you never would have said if somebody had asked you then, you might have been able to be led to a place where you could recognize that, yeah, I'm trying to win these basketball games to get validation from my dad and from my coach and from the people in my life. You might be able to express that with some help in those years. You probably wouldn't have said, I'm trying to earn love.
Right.
Right. But that's what we're doing.
That's what we're doing.
That's the consistent thing.
That's what we're doing.
I think what makes it consistent in all of us, Michael, is believe it or not, we're all affected by the fall.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what your belief system are. It's no respecter of persons, as Jimmy Evans would say, just like the law of gravity is no respecter of persons. You're affected by this thing, whether you believe in it or not.
Right.
And I think what it causes us to do, this just landed on me, the fall caused us to question whether or not we're loved.
Mm-hmm.
The question came in.
Which brings in 10 more questions that you know, am I worthy of love? Is God good? What do I need to do? There it is.
How do I fix it?
How do I fix it? So, I learned, and as we've, walked on this mission for a lot of years, this is such a consistent challenge, a consistent ache that hearts have, men and women, across the age span. You can be dealing with, the teenagers, the 20-somethings, or you can jump to the 70-somethings. This thing needs maintenance.
Yeah, still the same question.
This thing needs attention. So what we've written and talked about from our own experience and what we've shared, SJ, for a lot of years, is we come into this story with some primary questions.
Mm-hmm.
And again, these are questions about love, but there's a question mark. Back to the effect of the fall.
Right.
The first people we take that to is mom and dad. And yes, they have moms and dads. That's grandma and grandpa. They have moms and dads. That's great grandma and great grandpa. I mean, you've got this thing going on generationally. And as we heard a couple weeks ago, right, we were together, heard our good friend Wendell talking about legacy in the lives of two different men.
Right.
And one for 5 generations.
Yeah, Jonathan Edwards and Max Jukes. Look them up.
One was a family of ministers and missionaries and
vice presidents of colleges.
Of colleges and of the United States, senators, congressmen.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it wasn't a perfect family. But Jonathan Edwards, for goodness sake, has a mark in Christendom as a missionary who fell in love with God late in his life.
Yeah.
Realized that he needed to love his family differently. And this is the legacy we're talking about. Dukes, on the other hand.
Yeah. Jukes.
Yes.
Yeah. Jukes.
Jukes. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
It's just a rap sheet of incarcerations, prostitution, murder, early deaths. I mean, that may be another whole subject.
That's a legacy podcast series.
And a generational, what do we mean by generational sin? But what I was getting at before I got off into that trail was the questions are still there. Every generation, if you're alive with parents that are older and you're a parent and you have kids and you have grandkids, 4 generations, you'll see these questions. You'll see it on display. You'll see it at Thanksgiving. You'll see it at Christmas, right? You'll see it constantly.
Well, once you can see it, you can't unsee it, right? And you see it everywhere.
And so, drum roll, right? Here's what we want you to see. The question that every human heart is asking, do you see me and do you love what you see? Do you want to be with me? The more we take that question to the world, which you do in the first place, you just do. But the more we take that to the world, even church, if that hasn't answered well, in the contrast of you and me, and it wasn't answered so well in my journey, there was way more influence of this conditional performance type life that I adopted or that it got a hold of me. That's another whole other conversation, how the enemy can work in it. But SJ, I was like a beggar. And I have all the Sunday school pendants of attendance and participation, but it did not meet this deep addiction in the way that we have discovered in the last decade of our lives that it can.
Yeah, so I think it's a natural response. First of all, I want to say the questions we ask can all be tied back to the ingredients of love, right? Do you see me? Acceptance. Do you love who I am? Do you see who I am? Do you love what you see? I mean, do you want to be with me? Belonging, right?
Right.
Do I matter?
Yeah.
That's significance. I mean, can I be loved? Am I worth
Yeah.
being loved, right? That's that worth question. And then, do you see me? Again, validation. So these questions, again, we've got to go back to what happened. When did it become a question? And I think we've talked a little bit about that. And why do we go to other lovers?
Right.
I mean, the way God says it, the way Scripture says it is other lovers, right?
Yeah.
Other than God. So I can't remember where that is, but we seek these things in the natural. We seek these things in the physical realm. And maybe if we get them to some degree, they'll satisfy for a little while, but ultimately they don't.
And that's a dangerous thing too, because then when I take my questions to other image bearers and I use my skills, talents, abilities that I'm learning, in junior high, you might have some, but crap, if you find something that kind of works to arrange for this,
sure,
man, you'll make a career out of it.
Well, and that's why you end up with actors and actresses that get this plastic surgery, right, to try to go back to when they were loved by everyone. I mean, there's just
you'll make a personality out of it.
That's right.
Or the crazy thing is, if it doesn't work, pardon me, but deep down, there's this percentage of people like, F this.
Yeah.
If you're going to hurt me, well, I'm going to make sure I deserve it.
If you're I'm going to hurt you.
You're right. Or I'll hurt you before me. I mean, these strategies get very, very, very sophisticated. They're not that complicated.
No.
They get very sophisticated, very strong, and rooted very deep. I mean, that's why encounters with God's love is an incredible remedy that we'll talk more about. But I remember being a parent, SJ, watching my kids go through these years that we just talked about, junior high, high school. Oh, I wish I had given more weight, more credit to this very, very volatile and very, very powerful time. Unfortunately, with my girls' hearts, when they were that age, my daughter's journey, I wasn't near as loving, caring, and sensitive about it all. And I dare say, bro, it wasn't just them. Trying to live in the shallows of this thing that we're talking about actually makes you shallow when it comes to loving and caring, validating. Instead, you dismiss. Instead, you just scowl and scold. And, well, you shouldn't be hanging out with that group anyway.
Right.
I mean, short answers that aren't helpful, lectures that do not speak to the heart and do not tend to the heart. When you understand what your child is feeling because you have come to understand and remember what you felt, this is a powerful way to relate, to identify, to sympathize, empathize, and love.
Yeah.
And love younger hearts. Yes, they're a little lost in this thing. They don't know how to function in the jungle.
Yeah. Don't you remember when you were that young and had it all figured out? No.
And how heartbroken you were about not being invited to this.
I mean, or
not making that team, or being made fun of for whatever.
Yeah, there's so many opportunities for your heart to be missed and be traumatized and all these other things because most people, parents, coaches, teachers, other people of influence in your life are not taking this journey of unraveling what happened to them, perpetuating a harmful pattern.
Thank you for stepping into the trap. Because here's what I want to say before we take the break. SJ, the reason why is it takes time and energy and effort to love well and to understand what another human being is going through. And most people
don't have the time to spare.
Don't have or take the time.
Yeah, it's not that they don't have the time. And other things are prioritized.
Right, and the narrative is so entrenched within their hearts and minds this striving, this arranging for, the strategies of love, and the hurt that they've had along the way, it just desensitizes a heart towards those who are asking that question literally.
Yeah. Yeah. How many stories do we see? Like, we talk about movies and movie clips all the time. How many of them are about an older heart that is closed off and calloused by their experiences, by their time, and then the younger heart comes along and helps them to come alive again.
Helps them soften, helps them come alive.
We see it time and time again.
And we love it.
Yeah.
We
because we want it for ourselves.
That's right. We love that story.
Yeah.
Or the occasional story of grandpa, grandma who speaks love and life into younger hearts, or goes on that journey of restoration with their adult child. I mean, there's Academy Awards for these kinds of roles.
They're 100% classic films.
And we love them and need them. So when we come back, I want to just kind of move a little bit into some of the biblical, not to prove, but just to remind our listeners just about the goodness of this. I mean, we've been describing how volatile, fragile, and hijacked our questions. Do you see me? Do you love what you see? Do you want to be with me? How that can set us up for heartache. And then these strategies that we learn, like, okay, I'm not going to do that again.
Right.
Or I'm always going to be the one.
I'm never going to let someone do that to me.
Right.
Yeah.
I will know what to do. I'll have the answers. I'll make the shot. I'll know the thing to say. I will not be shamed again. I will not be made to be afraid again. And those strategies, as you said earlier, SJ, there's expiration dates on all of them. Yep. And here's why. I believe God the Father wants us free of those. And he's waiting for that day when they expire. And would you come to me? If you'll come to me, I will help you with that. I will show you a different way. And thank goodness he is love. And we'll talk about that when we come back on the Exploring More podcast in just a minute. Hey, friends and allies of Exploring More podcast. We wanted to bring some attention to some of our free downloadable resources on our Zoweh website. First, there's a 14-day devotional on being fathered by God. This is the same devotional that you can get a PDF download on our website. You also can find on the YouVersion Bible app. Also, the 14-day devotional on the heart of a warrior, another great resource to walk through with men or in your own time alone with God. The last free download that we want to draw attention to is the biblical theology of the heart. Is the redeemed heart good? Is this piece of equipment that is so vital to living in the kingdom, is it good or is it not? Download the biblical theology of the heart to find out more. You can find these 3 resources and many other free downloads and free audio files on our website at www.zoweh.org. Welcome back, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast, talking about what love is. 2-part series, hanging out with SJ. Yeah, SJ, seriously, bro, I've got like 4 pages of notes and I'm still on the first 3 or 4 lines. I mean, it's just, I love talking about it, and I want love for me, my friends, our team. And so, man, thanks for trusting me to sit down. Let's go through this again.
Yeah.
Let's explore this again. And we were talking before the break about this transition into some of the biblical encouragement that I just need to be reminded of. I've been looking at John in my own time alone with God in the mornings, and golly, man, that disciple is all about it. And so I'd love to look at that just a little bit. So the first half of the podcast, we talked about what love is. We got the other podcast series on that. Those are the ingredients. That's what love is. But I think there's this other part, SJ, that still is what love does. What does it do? How is it manifested? What's it look like? And so, yes, validation, acceptance, worth, belonging, significance, invitation, those are things. But scriptures have got some pretty powerful invitations, definitions, descriptions on this. Yeah, so I asked you to prepare some of those. I've got a handful of those. Where do you want to go? What would be a good place to start?
Well, listeners, I don't know if I've shared it before, but I have a history when I was working at the church, I was a marriage pastor, did a lot of biblical counseling and premarital counseling. And there's probably 90% of the people that I've either counseled or I've actually officiated their wedding include which scripture do you think it is?
Oh, yeah.
That's
1
right.
Corinthians 13.
1 Corinthians, the love chapter.
Everybody
right?
wants that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know I didn't do a great job of leading people through a study of what those words really mean. But I love the amplified version, Michael.
Lay it on me.
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 13, if I speak with the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, and this is bracketed, right? So the amplified is just what you would think, listeners. It's an amplified version of the Bible, right? So it adds in some Hebrew translation of words and things like that, so you have a better understanding of exactly what is meant in some of these passages. So if I speak with the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, and then would be in brackets, for others, growing out of God's love for me. I mean, you can just stop there for a while. Yeah. Then I have become only a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And again, this is bracketed, just an annoying distraction. So if I can't love others, that grows out of the love that God has for me and my understanding and belief of that, then I'm just annoying.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well,
because I've been that guy, right? Because all I'm doing when I'm trying to love without a love that is based in God's love for me is I'm trying to arrange for love for myself.
I mean, it's the noisy gong and the clanging cymbal because, when I'm wearing that and wearing that out, my neediness to be loved, it has a noise and a clanging. If you haven't ever been that person, good for you. But
your name is Jesus.
Yes, but the rest of us, we actually can recognize that person. It's kind of exemplified, SJ, in too much or not enough. Like, man, that guy drinks too much.
Yeah,
man.
Or he's just over the top with his personality. Or,
he is always talking or interrupting. That's some of the symptoms of you're addicted to love and your strategies and personality aren't working.
Or you're hiding because you just have given up on receiving love at all.
And the people that go that way, SJ, bless their ever-loving hearts, they actually know something. They feel inadequate. They feel less. It's the other people that have no idea, that are over the top. They don't really understand what this center really looks like, where you don't have to make this happen, bro. You don't have to entertain. But they've learned if they can make the bar laugh, if they can make the card table giggle, the attention is it's awesome.
Very affirming.
And for those who, suffer in that silence you're talking about, or that quiet desperation, who wish they could, you really don't want to be like that person. But here's the point, right? Comparison. Comparison is a death to all of us. Just such a thief of identity, of worth.
It's a tool of the enemy designed to produce shame.
Yes.
That's all comparison is.
Yeah, well said. Yeah.
So I moved down to 1 Corinthians 13:7. I love this one. Love bears all things, regardless of what comes, believes all things, looking for the best in each one, hopes all things, remaining steadfast during difficult times, endures all things without weakening. And then into 8, love never fails, it never fades nor ends. Now that one right there, love never fails, it never fades nor ends. That's only true in the spiritual realm. That's only true about God's love. Anything that we try to do under our own power, all of us have loves that we've lost. People that we once felt very strongly for, and now they're out of our lives, or vice versa. There's things that have faded, the things that we've loved, people that we have loved, where that love has faded, and that doesn't happen with God.
Yeah. We got to do a podcast series on grieving. We got to, because we've explored a little bit of this. All I want to say, when you said loss, that always comes up in my heart, grief and grieving. It's a term of love. It's about the processing of pain that I don't get to love them in person anymore. They don't get to love me in person anymore. I'm without them. And there's a void
Sure.
right? Or they didn't love me the way I wanted them to. I never heard from them. And so there's that other kind of loss.
Sure it is.
So we'll talk about grief another time. All
Yeah.
I want to bring out, as you brought it up, was it's a term about love. It's
It is.
another subcategory that's significant, weighty, and invites us to a process of heartache and restoration. How is that void filled? Where do I take that lack? Where do I take that hole, that is now there? Hey, the more we love, the more it hurts. As Lewis says, if you want to escape this, just put your heart in a casket and bury it deep.
Yeah.
Don't love anything.
Mm-hmm.
Don't love anything.
I'm going to look up that quote while you're talking about it.
Yeah. And I think his point is because that's the shallow water. I'm going to go back while you're looking that up to 13:4. Love endures with patience and serenity. Love is kind and thoughtful. It's not jealous or envious. Love does not brag and is not proud or arrogant. It's not rude. It's not self-seeking. It's not provoked or easily sensitive or overly sensitive and easily angered. So does not take into account wrong suffered. So, oh my gosh, this is what love looks like. And as you said earlier, for all you people who aren't Jesus, I mean, this is what we're shooting at. This is what we're going after. I think the very, very kind thing to say is, SJ, this is not available while my false self is running the show, while my wounds and the message of those wounds from my history are in play. That's why the pursuit of healing and wholeheartedness is the best way to learn how to love like this. And takes us to 1 John 4, right? God is love.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we turn to love itself, to love us from those ditches, to love us from those holes, to love us out of those deficits, and to heal, we're back to talking a little bit about the grieving process, but what we're talking about is how that is even part of a greater process called healing. Coming to Him with our hurt, coming to Him with our wants, our hopes and desires, and man, what a vulnerable thing to say, right? Here's my questions again, God. Here they are. Do you love me? Do you see me? Do you love what you see? And inviting Him to tangibly do that. I have talked to 2 people in the last week or so who were on the brink kind of suicide. Literally, their prayer was, do you see me? Do you see how I'm suffering? Do you see me? Do you care?
Does anybody see me?
Yeah.
Can anybody love me?
Now, I'm not proposing that I'm the answer to their prayer. I'm not proposing that, but I'm also not rejecting the idea. When you see how large the story is, and you're sitting across somebody now that can say, I see you. I'm so sorry.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want to talk about in the next podcast. Part 2 is this listening thing that we've been learning a heck of a lot about.
Yeah.
But the power of that, bless their hearts, they can't associate. God sent a messenger. It's in this counselor, or it's in this friend, or it's in this kind person who said, well, I'll sit with you a while.
It's literally the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, man.
I mean, when you come along and bump into that, and I'm not disagreeing with you, God will partner with any one of us to bring someone hope and love and acceptance and joy and validation. I mean, God will partner with any one of us to do that for another. But when you're in that place, that desperate place,
very hard.
I mean, you're bumping up against that, and I know you've experienced it. You're bumping up against that, and there's so much unexplored territory below the surface.
Yeah.
That's behind getting to that place in the first place.
Yeah.
But you got to start a journey somewhere, right? The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step.
Right.
So
right.
If you go down to 1 Corinthians 13:12, part of the reason that this happens to us, we experience this loss, we experience these heartaches that bring us to a place where we don't believe we're lovable. For now, in this time of imperfection, that's a mouthful right there.
Mm-hmm.
We see in a mirror dimly, a blurred reflection, a riddle, an enigma. Why doesn't anyone love me? Why doesn't anybody see me?
Mm-hmm.
But then when the time of perfection comes, we will see reality face to face. Now I know in part, just in fragments, but then I will know fully. So imagine that. I mean, we know just parts of the love that God has for us now, because we're looking at it through this mirror darkly. And just as I have been fully known by God, and now there remain faith, abiding trust in God and his promises. This 1 Corinthians 13, this faith, hope, and love verse, this is sort of the, how do we get by until he comes back to me?
Yeah.
Right? And now there remain faith, abiding trust in God and his promises. And listeners, in order to abide in God and trust in God, you can't trust someone if you don't love them and you don't believe they love you. And then you have to understand what his promises are.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to come to a place where you're understanding and then believing what he's promising you. So then the next one is hope, confident expectation of eternal salvation, right? So we know where we're going. We know the end of the story. We know how it ends. Love, unselfish love for others growing out of God's love for me. Again, it's this, I can only love because of the way that God is loving me. These three, the choicest graces, but the greatest of these is love. So I had a question for you, Michael, that brings me to, which is, can we really love others without learning to be loved, right?
You want a straightforward, simple answer?
No.
Straightforward's no.
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 Because we've tried, right?
There's so much to that. Again, for whatever 0.5% of the population that somehow is graced with some ability beyond their heartache and story, I'm just guessing and I'm betting that if I got to hear their story, somehow, some way they were loved. There was someone who entered into the story and loved them from the poverty of love, from the woundedness of love, from the disappointment. Does that make sense? You know, one of our favorite stories is Les Mis, and the bishop, one encounter. He stays a night with that guy.
Jean Valjean, my brother.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I've ransomed you from love, from
Hatred.
hatred.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now I give you to God. So these encounters, another film I love, Secondhand Lions, with this boy who is being dropped off by his mom.
With these two curmudgeons,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Robert Duvall and Michael Caine.
And
you know,
this
is Haley Joel Osment, the I See Dead People kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't get that out of your mind somewhere in the movie. But holy cow, man. And he wants validation from these uncles. He doesn't even know he needs it.
But they do.
Until he starts to see that his uncles carry with them something. Now, they are pretty crusty characters. but it just shows how
they are crusty.
They're still impacting him, and he wants to be impacted. He wants the man talk. He wants to be shown. He wants to be told. So this answer, as abrupt as it feels to say, no, you can't go beyond the maps and the territory that you've experienced love. I think that's why the quest is so important for our lifelong at different stages of the masculine or different stages of the feminine journey. What does love look like now, God? And my questions, would you love me here? Would you love me in this?
Where were you in this earlier part of my story where this person wasn't loving me?
Right.
Where I did feel alone or abandoned or orphaned.
Yeah.
You know, where were you in that, God? And just not in a, well, it can be, right? In this sort of pleading down on your knees, I don't understand.
Or the fist.
Or with the fist, right?
You know, yeah.
God can take it.
Yeah.
But the point is embarking on that journey. I love how you said beyond the borders, beyond the maps, to do this exploration of where God is in our story, even when we're being disappointed by earthly beings.
Right.
Right? They're not coming through for us. They're not loving us the way our heart desires to be loved. But that doesn't mean God wasn't there.
Yeah.
So that's right where I am right now.
It's hard and wonderful and a bit mysterious to dive deeper into that. So if John is right, I'm going to jump to 1 John, and God is love, then those questions are very valid and important. And where were you? What is this about? Whatever conversation God wants to have with you there, SJ, I'm pretty sure where the conversation's going. And it will be questions from the Father to your heart. You may get some explanation. You may get some reasons. Well, that was their story. That was mom and dad's story, but I'm walking with you in your story. The idea too that is so hard in this is God's sovereignty, and yet his will and his way, those three coordinates, very, very major conversation that we're starting to have right now, is people sin every day. And we know that's not God's will. God's will is not for people to sin and wound and hurt and partner with the enemy or be used by the enemy in that system of the kingdom of darkness. So it happens all the time, and it leaves marks. It leaves impressions. It can leave a scar depending on who it was, where it was, what happened, all of that. If this is painful to hear or your fists are tightening, it's a bigger conversation. It's a great conversation, one that we love to have, one that we explore over weekends in our retreats. But even then, sometimes, SJ, you just need somebody to listen to your story.
Oh, yeah. So that leads me to something I've been thinking about now for the last 10 minutes, Michael, is that everything that we do, listeners, go back and listen to all our podcast series. We talk about the false self. We talk about love. We talk about the masculine journey. We talk about all these things, is to unravel all the things that are in the way of you understanding that you are loved.
And experiencing it.
What's in the way of experiencing it? Yeah.
Yeah. So where was God is a great question. But if you want to dare ask it, buckle up.
Sure.
And enter in. I think there are some incredible counseling models and counseling lanes to step in. We've explored many, and I know there's still frontiers to explore. Contemplative prayer, centering prayer, soaking prayer, imaginative prayer, entering into this experiential, going back into your story and observing it.
Yeah, I just did again, at 50 years old, I just did the picture exercise that Gary and Lee Barkalow came up with. They created that idea.
We know, because we facilitated it, but then there's times we actually are the customers again.
Yeah.
There are windows to your soul, windows to your heart, windows to your hurt.
Right.
And to have those curtains open and somebody to stand there and go, wow.
Well, what is that? Or what happened over there? Or,
do you see the themes? And it's like, I do now that because we live so close to all this.
Sure.
So if God is love, and yes, affection is important and attention's important, and we need that. But there's a lot more to this. A kind answer, a kind invitation. I think this is what God is making good, making constant offers. I want to love you. I want to love you. Will you let me? Will you let me answer your questions? Will you listen with the ears and see with the eyes of your heart that I am good and that I want to make good things that weren't good in your life? That's what redemption and restoration is very much about. And it sounds like, it even feels when I say it, SJ, kind of oversimplifying. I don't want to give anybody a formula. I'm just talking about some of the headlines, though, that are really, really critical. And, this 1 John passage, 7 through, 13. I think I'm in the Message. Am I in the Message? This has got to be the Message. Yes, this is the Message. Hopefully it's a little different for some of our friends. My beloved friends, let us continue to love each other, since love comes from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and experiences a relationship with God. The person who refuses to love doesn't know the first thing about God, because God is love. Goes on about God loving us, sending the Son into the world that we might, through him, have salvation. This is the kind of love we're talking about, saving kind of love. Then he goes on, my dear friends, if God loved us like this, we certainly ought to love each other. So this is an answer to your question. If you're being loved like that, then the objective of God is, I'm going to love you so that you can love others, love one another.
Yeah, and the word picture that comes to mind is that love would flow through us.
Yeah.
I think the way that we operate in our earthly ways, in our physical realm ways, would be that we have this kind of reservoir inside us and we fill it up with whatever we fill it up with, and then it gets empty again, and we have to go back and win a few more games or sell a few more houses or whatever it is, date a few more girls.
Accomplish something.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then we can pour out again. And I think what we're talking about here is this love would flow through us if we get the things out of the way that are in the way.
Dude, you're stealing John's stuff. Let me finish First John. Just a couple.
That's high praise.
I'm down on
actually.
17.
Yeah.
When we take up permanent residence in a life of love, we live in God and God lives in us. This way, love has the run of the house. It becomes at home and mature in us so that we're free of worry on Judgment Day. Our standing in the world is identical with Christ. There's no room in love for fear, right? This is the perfect love casts out fear.
Right, yeah.
Well-formed love banishes fear. Since fear is crippling, a fearful life, fear of death, fear of judgment, is one not yet fully formed in love. So this is part of our journey. I mean, would you confess? I will. I'm not fully formed yet. I'm not fully formed in love, but
No.
I have tasted it.
Yep.
I have experienced it, and it is the direction that I want to go.
Yeah.
And have to go, because there are lives in my story that need me, that want me to love them. And back to your question earlier, my capacity, my ability to love them, I don't actually run towards them. I run towards God. That's my bet. That's my home. That's my place in order to have parts of my story redeemed and restored. And the more that history that happens, SJ, the more wholehearted I can become. But then they're in battles.
Mm-hmm.
They're in challenges. They're in hardship and opportunities and responsibilities and all kinds of things. I want to bring the best me that I can to them, loving them in those spaces. And in the grand scheme of all of this, in the right smack dab in the middle of it all, if I'm loving them, guess who's in the middle of that? If they're experiencing love from me, guess who's right in the middle of that?
Yep.
I'm never more godly than when I'm loving.
Sure.
And I believe when we're receiving love from God, there's nothing else that can make us more holy.
Yeah. I can't stop thinking about Neo. I'm sorry. This new Matrix movie is coming out.
Oh.
So I'm watching the old ones again, and I haven't gotten into even watching them again yet. But the first one and the clips that we show, I just think about when he finally figures out who he is, he becomes more adept in that realm, right, than anyone else previous or, I don't know about after. I can't remember the story completely, but I just remember how he operated, and he was just, nothing affected him. He would fight the agents, and it was like he was bored.
Yeah. He looks away from them.
Yeah, and he's doing the things with his hands, and then he stops all the bullets, and they all drop to the ground. And yes, it's an image of the power of God, the power of Jesus. I think it's more an image of who we can be with Jesus and how we can operate. Well, to your point,
we share it. We share. He shares it with us. We get to have a share in it, with him. So.
And he's just loving, and he's destroying agents and things like that, but he's also defending the ones he loves and operating in that realm in a way that protects them until they learn how to operate that way too.
Yeah.
And when you sit with someone and lead them to a place of understanding about what's in the way of them being loved or believing that they're loved, you're operating that way. Yeah. You're operating as a secret agent in the kingdom.
In the kingdom, right, for God. Yeah. Did you find the Lewis quote?
So I found two Lewis quotes really quickly. So the vulnerability one is the one you were talking about earlier with the casket. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the other one I thought of, Michael, and I'm going to change one word in this to serve our purposes, but the meaning is the same. Okay. Our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite love is offered us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased.
Yeah. So back to addiction, and here's desire. When our desires are shallow, when our desires are really for the love, acceptance, worth, belonging of other image bearers, that's what I mean by the shallower end. And the love of someone else and loving someone else is a wonderful thing. But as we have written and talked about, it can kind of be like those vampires, dude. I mean, you're going to start sucking the life out of them. The demand
No doubt.
of their meeting your need. And when they don't, from experience, I can say, well, there can be hell to pay.
Yeah.
Whichever end of that I'm on.
Really, that's another way this manifests, this lack of love or absence of love. If I'm trying to get what only God can provide from my significant other or another person in my life,
Yeah.
I'm putting an undue burden on them and asking them to do something they were never designed to do.
No, they can't carry that kind of weight.
Heck no.
So maybe let's just make more in the next, let's make this in.
Yeah, because now we're talking about boundaries,
In
right? You got to
session
put
2,
boundaries
right?
up and not let people do that to you.
Right.
And guard your heart.
Above all else, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. So yeah, we'll push a lot of notes into session 2 on what love is. And yeah, listeners, we want to help. We're on a journey too. We're learning. Hopefully there's been some encouragement, maybe some disruption and provocation in this conversation. But if you need someone to engage in your story, if you need someone to explore with you some more about what love is and where God is and the availability of redemption and restoration, hit us with an email.
Yeah, exploringmore@zoweh.org.
exploringmore@zoweh.org. So conferences coming in the spring, books, the Women's Deepening Journey video series, lots of cool stuff that we're trying to offer and share. Always, SJ, I love when I see some of the receipts that say 0. You know, people come to the Outpost online and find audio and video and
just free resources
encouragement,
we put up there.
free resources for their heart, and take those with them, man. I love that. And hopefully that will continue to encourage people on this journey of love and life and freedom that we're on, and that exploring more together would be good for all of us. So
until next time.
Yeah, until next time on the Exploring More podcast, keep exploring. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoweh.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoweh on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoweh on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.